Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference, the 13th annual. I'm Jamie Machek, and I work for the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and I am moderating the internal communications track. And assisting me is Lori Freund, who works for the Bridges Library System. Thank you, Lori. We had an excellent session kicking off at 9 o'clock, and I know this session will be the same. We have Brandy Cummings, and Brandy is the interim director at the Kenosha Public Library, and she's going to be talking about crucial communications and what does that mean and what does that look like. So Brandy, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you. I want to just take a moment to thank Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference for inviting us all here today, but also thank all of you. I know me and my team look forward to this web conference every year. There's always so many great opportunities to plug in and learn. But I want to thank you for spending some time, not just with me this morning, but diving deeper into crucial conversations and how we can have them, how to be better at them. And I just want to take a moment to kind of bask in the warmth of knowing that I'm with a group of people here who aren't just committed to public libraries and library work, but also committed to, bringing the best version of themselves to difficult situations. So thank you for joining me. I'm very excited to jump in with all of you today. As
Brandy, I
Yes.
I think you need to reshare again. It looks
Oh
like you're
no.
stuck.
That's
Okay,
okay. Let's go back out and back in. That's what technology does to us, isn't it?
it does. There we go.
How's that? Are we back?
We're back.
We're back. I love it. So, good place to jump right back in at. Let's talk about our goals for today. So, as we spend some time together, what my hope is that you'll walk away from this time together with feeling a little bit more prepared, with some good strategy that you can apply to your day to day, but also some time to reflect. And when we talk about crucial conversations, we're going to recognize that there's a lot there for us to dive into, that this by no means is going to be like all encompassing. There are a lot of different strategies, a lot of different frameworks that you can use. But my goal today is to help you feel prepared because we know that conversations that are difficult or conversations that might feel tense are rarely scheduled conversations, right? We rarely get the opportunity to say, today, my team is going to have a crisis. Today is the day I'm going to have a patron who's very angry about political issues. Like we don't get to schedule out those situations. So how can we get ready so that we can stay ready in our day to day? So, a little bit more about me. I know Jamie shared a little brief background on me. So, I come to library work over 16 years here at the Kenosha Public Library, which is my absolute home. I love this space. I've gotten to act as interim director for the last 5.5 months, and it has just been such an honor. Very happy to say that I needed to update this slide and my bio. I have finished my MLIS, so I have officially moved into Big L librarianship after many years of little L librarianship here at the library. But I share my education because some of what you'll hear today is going to sound like business strategy, and that's because it is. There's some really great framework that we can bring from the business world. What I pride myself on is taking the heart of what we do at public libraries, of being a service organization, of meeting people where they're at, and recenter some of that framework to meet the values and heart of what we do at public libraries. So I'm excited to share that with you today. But more than that, I'm also a wifey. I am an auntie, a full-time auntie of 11 littles, which keep me very, very busy. I am a maker of faces. It's very hard to get a good, consistent picture of me. If I have any team members in the presentation today, they can attest that I'm very expressive all the time. Um, but I share this too, not only to fill the screen with faces I love that help to bring my heart rate down a little bit during presentations, but because one of the key things we're going to talk about today, and one of the key things that's important when we look at the art of difficult conversations, is recognizing duality. And what I mean with duality is recognizing that all of us are a sum of parts. Our institutions are sums of parts. But each person that we're dealing with, whether this is, internal communication strategy, which is what we're going to focus on today, or external communication, everyone is bringing things to those experiences. We're bringing our lived experiences, we're bringing our past, we're bringing, how we grew up, our family dynamics, our culture, our understanding of society to these conversations. And part of the key for preparation, part of the key for being able to actively be responsive and not reactive in these conversations is recognizing that there's always more than you can see. And there, just like there's always more to me, right? There's, you know, I have certificates that hang on a wall. I have a job title. I have a role and a position with my organization and with my team. But I'm more than that, just like each of you is more than the work that you do. That's a lot. You're going to hear me say that a lot today too, because I think it's important that we recognize that this work that we do is very emotionally laborious. And I hope that today, some of the strategies I share, some of the scenarios we'll walk through together, because we'll do some actual walkthroughs, help you to feel more confident and more empowered with balancing some of that emotional labor, as well as having like hands-on tactics and strategies. So, when we're talking about crucial conversations and we're talking about internal communication, we recognize that not every conversation is the same. Sometimes when we're communicating, it is just factual information sharing, and sometimes it is more emotionally charged, or we know that we're delivering bad news. I'm sure that there are many of you who have been in the situation or the position where you've had to be the deliverer of bad news. And that is a really hard space to be. But today, to develop some shared language for all of us, when we talk about a crucial conversation, how do we benchmark that? Well, we're going to be talking about conversations that may include opposing opinions, strong emotions, or high stakes. And these three sort of categories, these three components, don't all have to be present. Sometimes just one is enough to make us feel physiologically that we are in a, difficult conversation, a crucial conversation. But there are times where all three show up, and we have to be prepared to deliver our communication, to be heard, to effectively provide information or to share information in a way that is beneficial. And this can be really challenging when we are going through um, just one or all three of these categories. So, what does this look like in our personal lives? Well, a crucial conversation in your personal life might be something like ending a relationship. There's obviously going to be elevated emotions. There could be great things at stake. If you've enmeshed your life with another person, it could look like asking a friend to repay a loan. If you've ever been in a situation where you have lent money, whether it's to a friend or a family member, you know that talking about finances is a difficult thing and it feels very vulnerable. Um, it could be asking in laws to quit interfering. All three of these combine those different benchmarks in varying scales, and all three of them require a lot of emotional preparation and skill set to navigate. But what does this look like at work? It's different at work. I am a big proponent of our workplaces not being our families, but rather being a friendly and warm environment for us where we can belong, but not the same as our personal lives, right? We need to recognize that separation. And when we're talking about crucial conversations at work, they show up a bit differently. It could be enforcing a boundary with a stakeholder. And I want you to just take a moment to like reflect on these situations and how it feels in your body when you're thinking about it. because so often that physiological response, our body's actual response to these stressors, is one of the key indicators that we're going to need to use some of the strategies we're going to talk about today, that we're going to need to dip into those tool belts to help us deliver and develop good communication skills. So enforcing boundaries with a stakeholder could be anything from a partner who wants to take a program or a resource in a different direction. We could be talking about critiquing a colleague's work, when something isn't right or it needs to be fixed. How do we handle that? How do we, at all levels of organizations, share negative feedback? How do we receive negative feedback? That is a huge part of navigating these conversations. Maybe it's approaching a boss who's breaking policy. We know in public libraries that our values and our integrity are essential to the work that we do. So what do we do when we know something's wrong? How do we have that conversation from a place where we feel confident that we'll be heard, confident that we'll be understood, but also that a positive outcome is the end goal? So again, as we're talking about duality, we want to think about our goals in these sorts of situations. And really, when it comes to difficult conversations, we're going to have two main goals here. We want to make sure that we are as effective as possible in our communication. But again, recognizing the duality of the fact that we are humans in difficult conversations, we also want to do some real good boundary work. And so when we talk about effectiveness, we're going to ask ourselves, like, is my communication concise? Is my communication consistent? Is it clear? I know we love alliteration in library land. With my years in marketing, these are some benchmarks I use for different communication campaigns. Like, am I understood? One of the most important things for us to remember in conversations like this, and especially in internal conversations, is that the conversation actually happens, the understanding happens at the ear of the listener. So I can come up with 17 different ways to say something, and it can make the most sense in the world to me. But if my team member, if my colleague doesn't have what they need to understand or to comprehend it, that communication's unsuccessful because the comprehension happens at the ear of the listener. And so checking in that your communication style is concise. Are you sticking to topic? Are you straying too much? Is there extra information that can be removed? Is it consistent? Can people find the same information in multiple formats? Are all of the team members helping to share the same information? Something I say to my leadership team here often is like, we should all be on the same page so that if a team member, whether a part of our specific department, our specific location comes to us, or if it's somebody from outside who might be filling in, it's like, are they getting the same messaging? And is it clear? Do people understand what we're asking them to do? Why we're doing what we do? How transparent can we be? And things like that. But then also recognizing that to do this well, you need to have a lot of self-awareness, which we'll talk about in a couple slides, but having boundaries, and what do boundaries look like in these conversations? A boundary might be that, you won't rehash a conversation after a certain amount of attempts. Sometimes it's that we have to put responsibility on somebody else to find their way to understand. A boundary might be that you're not willing to have a conversation without other people around to be able to help that conversation grow. A boundary might be that you leave work at work, that when you're outside of work and you're in your community, like that you separate yourself a little bit, that duality of being what I like to call KPL brandy and private citizen brandy. Another great boundary is accuracy, like making sure that your information is correct, that you're not willing to share information that isn't correct. And sometimes that might mean asking for time or space to research and gather information. to be able to ensure that what you're putting forward is accurate. That's a really great strategy, being able to say, like, I want to be able to fully answer your question to the best of my ability. To do that, I need a little bit of time to gather more information and put my thoughts together. Again, and that kind of feeds into honesty, which as I continue to do work here in conversations and communication work, I think I should actually change the transparency. Sharing with people that, hey, I don't have the answer right now. And that's okay, because you're not always going to have the answer either. But what I'm committed to do is finding the answer and bringing it back to you. Um, that's a really great way to prevent yourself from feeling like the expectation is that you're always going to be, Johnny on the spot. You're always going to have every answer at the tip of your tongue. You're not going to be able to do that. And then especially when on a normal day, but especially when we are in situations where we are dealing with heightened emotions or high risks, or again, opposing opinions, those benchmarks we've talked about, that taking that time and that space is really essential to be able to put forward the best information possible and to guarantee its effectiveness. A big portion of this work is preparing, right? Again, getting ready so you stay ready, because we don't know when these conversations are going to come up. We can't predict, usually, caveat, sometimes you can. You can't usually predict when you'll be having a difficult conversation like this. And I'm not going to walk through this entire slide, but there are a lot of really great like little snippets here, suggestions. One of the things that I think is most important is that active listening piece, and making sure that you are trying your best to hear what the other person is saying, and recognize that your circle of control, the things that you are in a position to be able to influence or enact on, is relatively small when we're having conversations with whether it's team members or stakeholders or our managers, our management. What you are able to do is control your own emotions, bring your own understanding, and we have to let other people be in control of their own emotions and their own understanding, which is really difficult. I think especially in an industry like ours, who understands the importance of information literacy and the importance of comprehension in a different way than maybe some other businesses do, it's really difficult for us to want to stop explaining, because we want to make sure that we're understood. And that's a very human reaction. If we think again about like our personal lives, I'm sure many of us can relate to over-explaining when you're in a situation because you feel misunderstood. Our instinct that is wired into us as humans is to seek out understanding and belonging. And one way we do that is by finding places where we feel understood. It's tricky when you have to come into a difficult conversation and recognize that you might not be understood and you might not be able to control that. That no matter how much information you put out, no matter how much you prepare, there's going to be scenarios where people are bringing, again, their own understanding, their own lenses, their own experiences to a situation that is going to prevent them from understanding you exactly how you want to be understood. I'd love to lie to you and tell you that there's like a really great formula to ensure you're always understood. What you can do is ensure that you're always accurate, that you're concise, that you're clear, and that you communicate consistently for that most effectiveness. So again, self-awareness, a little friendly health reminder, because again, this work is emotionally laborious. Not just the work of public libraries, but communication work is emotionally laborious because it's about relationship. We recognize that communication is never a one-way street. When communication is only going out, we know that that doesn't work. There's plenty of data behind that. There's a really wonderful study from Harvard Business Review that shows that businesses that don't have feedback mechanisms have an 80% higher turnover rate than businesses that do. So something as simple as a feedback mechanism, something as simple as a email inbox that your team can respond to, a feedback form, a survey, which are all tools that we've implemented with our teams over the years or over the last year, um, can greatly improve communication. But just taking a moment again to reflect on the self-awareness, which is so crucial for navigating these conversations, acknowledging your own feelings. Something that, my team hears me say often is, you know, I'm sad to have to share this. It makes me sad that this is what we have to choose to do. But here's why we're doing it, and here's why I think it's the best way forward. Because sharing that information, like sharing that, hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable because I know that this is going to disappoint you. I'm not looking forward to having to share this news with you because I think it might not be what you want to hear. Taking a moment to acknowledge your feelings helps to set the tone. It helps to connect in these conversations, but it helps to tell the person you're talking with, like, hey, I'm a human too. And we are in this together, having this conversation. In the workplace, there's obviously a little bit more balance. Like you have to be mindful of how how emotional you get. You have to be mindful of the boundaries of the workplace and of each person. Not every team member is going to have the same openness or bandwidth for that sort of communication. But I think if you can go to it authentically, sharing like what you're feeling, recognizing what you're feeling, it gives them the space for some self-awareness in the conversation. Um, One thing as my career has progressed that I have had to remind myself of, because I think it's really important, is recognizing your status. Is there a power indifference here? Now that I'm sitting in the seat of interim director, I work day to day with my frontline team. And it's really easy for me to make a comment that in my head sounds just like a passing observation, but to some of them might sound like a directive or an order for change. So it's important to recognize, like, in our workplaces, we are going to have power and differences. It could be as great as, your position to another position. It could be just seniority inside of the organization, and a great way to make sure that you aren't unintentionally leaning into that difference, that power and difference, is to ask, like, did that make sense? Was I clear? Are you sure of what the next steps are? Sometimes just asking those extra questions helps to make sure that everyone's walking away on the same page. Again, as we talk about boundaries, we know the importance of making sure that we are getting our own cups refilled. Um, Especially again, people who are doing a lot of emotional labor, like where are you getting your respite? Where are you getting your inspiration? Are you carving out time to do, creative things that you love? Um, as a marketer, I am a data nerd, and I have been intentionally carving out more time in my work week to really sink into some of our data because it invigorates me to see the story told in a quantitative way. Um, it makes me really excited to actually see where we've moved metrics and where we've moved needles, and making sure that I'm finding those moments to be able to do some of that. That's easier to do when you are in positions of power. So for those of you here who are leaders, either in title or position, I encourage you to lend your privilege to help your team members who aren't in positions of power to be able to carve out time for that too. When their cups are filled, it's easier for your cup to get filled too. But lastly, staying curious. And this is a really easy strategy to implement and a really difficult one to reframe how we talk to people and how we talk to ourselves. So, especially when you're in a situation where you're having a highly emotional conversation, or maybe you're receiving difficult feedback. Um, I am in a role where I have very open communication with my team, and I often receive very difficult feedback about organizational decisions, about municipal decisions, a variety of things. And what I have done for myself that has been very helpful, and what I've encouraged my leadership team to do, is to try not to respond from a place of judgment where I think I know what they mean. but rather to say, I'm curious about what you just said. Could you please share more? As you start to exercise that curiosity a bit more, you'll find that, again, there's a physiological benefit to when you're moving into these conversations. You're going to feel less on edge. You're going to feel less reactionary. You're going to feel less out of control of your response or your ability to navigate the conversation in a meaningful and impactful way. So let's look at a scenario together. Let's walk through, like, what does this actually look like? One of the things we just talked about is, what are we bringing to these conversations? And so in this scenario, we have an employee, Willow, who is behind on their work and tasks are piling up. We have Marcy, who's a manager and has a team that has a shortage. We've all been there. We've all, especially right now, there's so many bugs going around. I swear every week I'm sending somebody home. I hope everyone's healthy on this call. My goodness. But in this scenario, Marcy's team is short and Willow needs to be asked to take on some extra tasks to help, but also needs to be reminded that tasks have to be done on time. So if we're Marcy in this situation, and we consider these questions, like what is the best question for us to prepare ourselves for a conversation that we might be feeling is going to be difficult? Question 1, how can I keep Willow from feeling angry? This is a really natural question. We're trying to control the environment. We're trying to anticipate what the team member is feeling. And to some degree, we'll always need to do that when we're having these conversations. But we sometimes go too far in making those assumptions that we limit the response or the ability of our teammates, of our colleagues, because they can only achieve or succeed as far as we believe them to be capable of. So if we approach every difficult conversation thinking that the response is going to be negative, we are only geared for and prepared for negative response. And so what we are preparing to share after that is only through a lens of being reactionary to pushback or to disappointment. So in this situation, we want Marcy to recognize that, like, she's assuming that Willow might be mad to be asked to take on more. Willow could be mad, but we don't know that for sure. And so we need to prepare as if, this is a neutral conversation. We're sticking to our facts. We're controlling what we can control. And that's outside of other people's emotions. If we're talking about question 2, how can I convince Willow to feel okay about taking on more? The truth is we can't. We can't convince Willow to feel anything. And we, as library workers, can't convince our teammates to feel differently about anything. And that doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to influence or encourage, but the way other people think, the way they feel, what their values are outside of our control. What we can do is provide accurate, clear information. We can provide transparency, and we can set expectations. So an expectation that we have here at KPL for our team is you don't have to agree, but I'm asking you to support. Many years ago, we automated and brought in self-check-in and self-checkout. And at that time, we had some team members who had some really strong feelings about it. And they were understandable feelings. It was a new service model. Our community wasn't used to it. Our community loves our front desk staff, and rightfully so. They're amazing. They're impactful. I mean, it's who I go to when I'm looking for reading recommendations. The messaging to them again was like, I don't need you to agree with self-checkout. I don't need you to think that, like, this is the best decision ever, but I need you to support this institutional directive. I need you to not talk poorly about it. I need you to encourage patrons to find the best way for them to use the library. For some of our patrons, that is self-checkout. Right now, the majority of our circulation business is done through those machines. But for a good portion of our patrons, they still prefer going to the desk, and we're very happy to provide that service for them as well. But we don't have to allow our personal opinions in the workplace to override what the good of the team is. There's times and places, and those concerns should always be welcomed and heard. But, as a team, we always have to come together and recognize that I can't convince a team member to feel differently, but I can ask them to help support an initiative. Which leads us to the last question, which is the best question for our friend Marcy, is what are the facts and what assumptions am I making? As you prepare to have a difficult conversation with people, rather than trying to focus in on what their emotional reaction will be, or rather trying to focus in how do I sway them to my side, ask yourself, like, what is it that I need to convey? What are the facts? What is accurate? What is clear? And then take a moment to check in and say, what assumptions am I making? Am I assuming that this is going to anger them? Am I assuming that they are going to be against this initiative? And that's going to help you sort of level set for yourself and feel more confident moving into that conversation. Because we know that one of the hardest things when you're having conversations like this is actually starting the conversation. If you've ever been in a situation where you need to deliver bad news to somebody, you might get that feeling in your gut, your heart might race a little bit, you might get a little sweaty, because you're preparing for the dread. You're experiencing anxiety, you're experiencing difficulty recognizing that you're going into uncomfortability. Uncomfortability is unavoidable. But hopefully with some of these strategies and these tips, you'll feel more confident navigating into that. So how do we set the tone and how do we set expectations for these conversations? Excuse me. One of the best ways to set the tone for difficult conversations is to come with an understanding of empathy. And there are a lot of businesses and a lot of leadership models that will tell you that a leader's role is not to be empathetic to their team because you are doing what is best for the organization. But I think it is undeniable that what is best for the organization has to include empathy for the team, because without the team, we aren't able to be successful or operate our services or make impact. And so having that empathy, recognizing that duality, recognizing that this is an individual person who is on a team that is bringing their own lived experiences, their own understanding to this situation. And that sometimes you have to think of that for 90 people. Again, it's a lot. But by taking the moment to set that as the groundwork, that this is a human organization. I say this a lot to my team, that we are a very human organization. And I don't mean that just because we are run by humans. AI has not fully taken over yet, but because we are an organization of emotional work. We are an organization of big feelings, big heart, and we ask our teams to care by the nature of our work. We meet people at some of the hardest parts of their lives and some of the best moments of their lives. And both of those peaks and those valleys require a lot of empathy. And so coming to your difficult conversations, your crucial conversations with empathy, with understanding that there's humanity here, is really key for setting the tone. Again, you've heard me talk a bit about accuracy and why that matters, why it's important that we are gathering our information, taking the time to make sure that we have, our points put together. And we can't always do this. You're not always going to be in the situation where you can, but the better prepared you are, the more often you will find yourself being able to respond quickly in pressing or more immediate situations. And then also that acknowledgement piece, acknowledging that the conversation is awkward, acknowledging that the conversation is uncomfortable, acknowledging that the news you're sharing, it might be hard to hear, but that you're here to give them space to process, that you're here to hear from them. One thing that I offer often in situations like this is, hey, I know what I shared with you is a lot. why don't you take some time to process it and come back to me? And then I clear out time so that they have time to sit with information. So often, again, we are put into situations where we have to be reactive, where we don't have time to digest, we don't have time to actually process information. And by setting up the ability to take space and make space is really crucial to have these conversations start to move out of those benchmarks we talked about earlier, right? Suddenly the stakes are a little less high. Suddenly the emotions are a little more tempered. Opinions may still oppose, but perhaps we have the opportunity to have a better understanding of where someone else is coming from. So while we might not agree, we may be able to find places of support. And moving through empathetic language is a really important, sorry, friends, a really important way to do this. And little tweaks to language make a big difference. You know, our goal here is to avoid judgment, to offer connection, again, because it's very human when we're dealing with this sort of conversation, especially internally, and to give space. So I won't read through the slide again, but there's a lot of study on empathetic language, a lot of study on how we can make better word choices to get our opinions and thoughts across. One thing that I know I've encountered a lot in my career is this language isn't going to be for everyone. I have some great colleagues who are just straight shooters. And for them, when they get met with empathetic language, sometimes they feel like it is a bit of a marketing spiel or that it is clouding what we're actually trying to say or spinning a situation to not seem as dire or as bad. But again, as long as you're sticking with your accuracy, as long as you're staying clear and concise and honest, you're offering that transparency, you're able to communicate kindly without being dishonest. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. It's certainly mine. I drink deeply from this cup. I think the way we talk to each other is so, so important and so underrated. And it really helps to set a better workplace where people can feel supported and seen when they know that they're going to be safe, psychologically safe, and can communicate. So opening the conversation, some of the best practices here to consider is figuring out space and place. So when you can, letting someone know that you want to arrange a time to talk that's convenient for both of you, giving them what information you can ahead of time so that they feel prepared. No one likes to be surprised with difficult news. And sometimes just letting them know, like, this isn't a bad conversation. I have a team member here who, when they call their employees in for a meeting, they have a code word. They'll say puffins to let them know that, like, it's not scary. I tell my managers all the time that we all suffer from principal office syndrome when you get called into the office and like, hey, can I chat for a minute? Um, I've started joking with my managers and saying, like, be scared, because they know if I'm telling them to be scared, that it's not going to be a scary situation, because that would be the most ridiculous thing for me to do as their leader. So just taking the time to create space and let them know, setting the stage, let them know what to expect. Considering your body language. If you're sitting across from them with the arms crossed and scowling, or you're looking down the whole time, people aren't going to feel invited to participate in a conversation, let alone invited to listen. Being mindful of your expression is what your face is doing. One of the things that I do when I do some board training here at the library and in the greater community, I talk to them about, when people come in for public comments, how do you practice your face? Because you can't respond. A really great trick is to focus on holding your tongue at the roof of your mouth. It kind of gives you a neutral expression. I, again, am a very expressive person and maker of faces, and so I'm always trying to check in on that. If you are standing and talking with someone, recognizing, like, how do you hold your body? Being straight on with them can feel confrontational. Tilting your body 30 degrees, again, creates this openness. And being transparent, as we've talked about, and getting to the point quickly, right? Acknowledging, like, hey, we're having this meeting today to talk about some performance issues. I want you to know that this conversation is going to feel uncomfortable. but I'm confident we can get through it together, and I'm confident we're going to find ways to help you be successful. But we need to acknowledge where we're off track right now and figure out what's going wrong. So that way people aren't wondering. If you have ever gotten a text from someone that's like, hey, we need to talk, you know how that dread builds, you know how that anxiety builds. We don't need that in the workplace either. And so getting to that point quickly is always really helpful. Recognizing that delivering difficult messaging is a skill set. It's something that you have to exercise. It is a muscle. So again, using some of these strategies, being clear and specific, giving examples when it's appropriate. One of the hardest things to do on the spot is give an example. We've all been there when someone's like, well, tell me a time where that actually happened, and everything goes out of your brain. So if you can, again, prepare as much as you can for these conversations, be sincere, telling the truth. And if it is, an organizational decision, sticking to the talking points, sticking to the messaging from your team. We've talked a bit about taking that space and circling back, but also allowing people to ask questions. And if you don't know the answer, being able to say, like, I'm not sure, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. Scenario 2, I know we're coming to the end of our time soon, and I want to make sure I leave time for questions. So let's breeze through this one together really quick too. So there are upcoming changes to your department, which would be a good way of getting a difficult conversation with a team member started. There's 4 different things we're going to walk through here and whether they work or not. Should you let the person know you want to talk, set up a time that you both agree to, and say, I believe you may have heard about the changes to our upcoming changes to our department? Well, yes and no. So you're more likely to get off to a good start if you can arrange that time. We talked about making that space, and you introduce the subject to get to the point quickly. This I feel like gets like halfway there, right? We're like, hey, we need to talk. You may have heard these things. The challenge there is you're relying on word of mouth. You might be relying on some institutional gossip. I know all libraries, we all have really good internal communications, team member to team member. Sometimes that message can get a little distorted. Should you stop the person in the hall and say, I bet you're worried about the upcoming changes to our department. None of us want to lose our jobs, right? Well, no. So one, this is in public, you're in the hallway. There's the opportunity for people to hear bits and snips as they walk by, which is really challenging. But also you're feeding into some worry here. The idea that like none of us want to lose our jobs definitely starts the conversation for the listener with, I'm in an unsafe space. Like, yes, nobody wants to lose their job, but there's just better ways of having those conversations. Should you send a person a text or an email chat that says, drop by tomorrow, we need to talk? No. This is one of the things that I've talked with a lot of leadership about in different industries, because so often it's easy for us to send a chat or a text to just be like, hey, pop over, I want to have a conversation. But with no hint of what it's about, they don't know what they're walking into, leaving them unprepared to engage in meaningful dialogue, but also creating extra emotional tension that doesn't need to exist. And that worrisome assumptions can really disrupt like day-to-day work, but also it erodes at trust and relationship building in the organization. So ask the person to come to your office, have them sit across from you and say, the upcoming department changes have implications we need to discuss. This is where we talk about body language a bit more. So being mindful of, sitting directly across from someone can sometimes feel very confrontational or exaggerate the power dynamic that exists. Just being mindful that there's other ways to sit in a room, which might seem like a silly strategy. But when you think about walking into like a well set up event, where the buffet table's in the right place, tables are in the right place. It makes sense when you walk through, you know where to go. You kind of organically deal with wayfinding. All of that is inside of us all of the time. And that includes when we're setting the stage for challenging conversations. It's just being mindful, are you putting them into a corner physically? which will also put them into a corner emotionally. Are they in a space where they feel that they can be safe to have an emotional response? There's a lot of things to be mindful there when it comes to the physicality. But again, one of the most important tactics is to have these conversations is learning how to listen and respond. How do you stay on topic? How do you acknowledge what they are saying to you? How do you maintain positive and open body language? And how do you ignore distractions? Distractions could be as simple as story time getting out and the jubilation of a mob of toddlers, walking past. Or it could be them bringing up situations or topics that don't have to deal with what you're talking about. One tool I like to use is I appreciate that you're sharing that, and I'd love to come back to it, but I'd like us to focus on X. I'd like us to focus on, the topic we're here to talk about today. Or, sometimes I'll even say, I'm going to make note of that so we can come back to that at a different time, or I want to hear more about that. But right now we need to focus on why. And in your listening, making sure that you are being aware of nonverbal communication, that you're respecting their feelings and point of view, even when you think they may be wrong. That is a challenge for everyone, especially when you're peer to peer. Sometimes you just have people you're not going to vibe with, and you need to understand how to develop helpful and healthy communications with them. To do that, we come back to your body language. We come back to sharing options for moving forward. We don't want to fall into righteousness, which is, that feeling that we get when we think someone's wrong and we want to change their mind. We want to bring them around to our point of view. And we aren't going to be able to do that. We don't want to be afraid to follow up. We don't want to be afraid to say, like, I'd like to continue this conversation, or you brought up this topic when we talked about X, like, I'd like to set some time to talk about Y. To help the person in the conversation with you, you're going to want to avoid interrupting. You're going to want to manage your own feelings. You're going to avoid that over explaining or over apologizing. And you're going to show active listening skills. And there's some really great tips here too on how to manage all of that. One of the big things that I want to say, and key things for healthy work relationships, is to avoid stonewalling. And that is a tactic that relationship scientists will tell you is one of the key indicators of like relationship death. And really, that's what this is about, right? How do we have these difficult conversations? Well, we have relationship, and we have to recognize that relationship with our colleagues, with our coworkers, with our team members. And if we shut down, both physically or emotionally or verbally, we are ending that relationship. We are closing it off, and we are saying that there is no room for growth or acceptance or learning. Now, we are going to have people in our lives where their behavior may seem like stonewalling, but it could just be a difference. As a neurodivergent individual, and having people in my life who I love that have different neurodivergencies, I know sometimes what might seem like stonewalling is processing. And so making sure to ask, like, hey, do you need some time to think about that? Or why don't you offering it? Why don't you take some time to think about that and come back to me, is really crucial to having healthy workplace conversations. And again, there's some really, dramatic and difficult responses that come up. We're human, and when we're dealing with difficult conversations and difficult subject matters, people are going to get emotional. Sometimes people cry. I'm an angry crier, and that always makes me really frustrated with myself because I don't want to be an angry crier. Sometimes people get passive. Sometimes they get mean. But recognizing that some of these are, again, reactionary to the conversation, and having a little bit of grace while also maintaining boundaries and standards is really important. Good ways to do this is to try to avoid taking people's reactions personally, recognizing that their response is theirs, and it is because of things in their life and how they feel and how they think. It's not about you as a person. Expressing your need for space if something is getting out of hand, being able to say, like, we need to put a pin in this conversation and come back to it. Right now, we're both too emotionally heightened, or the emotions have taken over and we're not having a productive conversation. And again, that self-awareness and managing your own feelings is really essential here. and closing the conversation, which can be just as difficult as starting it. You don't want to let this conversation drag on. You don't want to continue to chew on the same talking points. And a good way to do that is to have good next steps, whether that is, hey, let's come back to this, or, I want you to write out what you're thinking and bring it to me. Looking for positive ways forward. How are we developing tools? How are we recognizing what works and what doesn't? And offering like, is there anything here that hasn't made sense or that you want to work through um, that I can come back to you on? Again, you don't have to do it in that moment, but offering the opportunity for unaddressed concerns to be acknowledged is really key and crucial here. Um, yeah, this is one of my favorites. This is something I had to deal with early on in my leadership journey. Dealing with someone whose response is a crying response in a conversation, and what would we do? So, leaving the room, our inclination might be to remove ourselves because it is uncomfortable. And you certainly can if the recognition is like this person is having a huge emotional reaction and they need time. What I think is really helpful is acknowledging it. Say, hey, I can see that this is affecting you emotionally. Do you want to take a minute and come back? Again, recognizing the humanity, opening up that space. If you just get up and leave, you're going to erode trust. You're going to erode the psychological safety of your workplace. So please don't just get up and leave without, acknowledging what's happening. Waiting quietly is one tactic that some managers like to use. I think that there is benefit. Obviously, again, every situation is going to be different. There's no silver bullet here, but giving them some time to feel what they're feeling and asking if they need a minute, and then just letting them take that time. They might choose to leave the space to catch a breath, but you can also sit there and hold that space with them. Again, empathy work is difficult, but it's very, very important. But just saying that, like, hey, I'm really uncomfortable when people cry, which is a strategy I have seen some people implement. Again, you're recognizing your own feelings, so you might feel like that checks a box here, but it doesn't offer any help or forward motion. So you can say instead, I like to offer an alternative. Um, I'm going to give you some space and I'm going to come back in 3 minutes. So you're recognizing that you're going to leave, that you're going to create physical and emotional space for this person, but without necessarily language that may unintentionally feel like blaming or shaming. So just a friendly little tip there. We're not going to walk through this one because I do want to make sure that there's time for questions in the chat. I know we're rounding out in about 7 minutes here. We're going to breeze this. You get the slides, so I promise you there's information there for you. But as I've said a few times in this conversation, that was a lot. And there's a lot to this, and there's always more. There's some really great books out there. One of the ones that I highly recommend is Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which really talks about how we have difficult, straightforward conversations in the workplace with empathy centered in them, which I think is so essential to building our teams. But I'd love to hear any questions and hear what I can help y'all with. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Brandy.
Of
So yes, we do have a few minutes left for questions. If you have one, you can submit it through the chat area, or you could also submit it through the Q&A. You do have the ability to submit it anonymously through the Q&A if you choose to do that. And yeah, seeing a lot of saw a comment from Denise. Ryan Dowd talks about empathy all the time, how effective
Yeah.
how effective that is. Good to hear it backed up here. Judy said so much great advice. One question that I get when I talk about I guess difficult conversations, Brandy, is how do you, so you have the conversation, you come to these understandings, and then what happens afterwards? How do we control how do we control those people that might gossip about it, or how do we control what they do? And I think the short answer to that is we can't. We really
Right.
can't. So
And is
any thoughts on that?
yeah, and isn't that an awful answer? Like I don't know about everyone else in this meeting today. I hate that I can't control every little thing in the world. Like, it drives me crazy. I would love to be able to like wave a wand and be like, okay, no one's going to gossip anymore. It'll never happen, and we have to live with that. What you can do, and this really comes back to organizational culture, right? Is you can say, and I found myself saying in my time in leadership is like, we want to build an organization where everyone in this culture feels safe to provide feedback. In order for us to do that, we all have to be committed to speaking kindly and honestly about each other. So I'm fine with you acknowledging that you don't like this. I'm not going to say you have to like this.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask that you're respectful when you talk to your teammates and that you're avoiding gossip.
Mhm.
Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes team members, will be like, yes, I'm not going to gossip, and then you stumble upon it. But it's also recognizing again the humanity of it. Like, hey, I know that this is something that we've talked about. I'd really love to see you find other ways, other avenues to make this productive. How can we make your concern productive so we can find a solution? Because the answer might be that we're not going to change the fact that we still have fines at our library. And while I would love to be fine free, and I know a lot of our team would love to be fine free, that's not in the books for us right now. It doesn't help us or our institution for us to get stuck or fixated there because we're going to miss
Yeah.
other growth opportunities.
Yes. This person writes, I have a staff member who tends to demand communication from me, but isn't great at communicating back to me. Any advice there?
Yes. One really great thing to do would be to set the expectation and make it very clear. Like, hey, you've asked to hear X from me, and I have provided it to you. I need to hear X from you. And explain, like, do you need regular reports? Do you need regular feedback? Do you need them to follow up in a certain amount of time? I think sometimes we mistake accountability for meanness, but like holding people to the expectation that like they are both participating in, that they're also actively participating in communication is essential. And it can be done kindly. You can hold people accountable kindly. Um, I hope that my team feels I'm holding people accountable kindly. I think about it all the time, but it can be done, especially when it's coming from a place with honesty and transparency.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Another question is, did you ever have an employee where you tried everything you could think of and it just didn't get better?
absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that was taught to me in my MBA program, which focused on human resources, I had this spectacular professor who shared with us the theory that every employee has two choices. You can stay in joy or you can leave in peace. And I want that to sit with all of us for a minute because staying in joy doesn't mean, again, that you're going to agree with every single thing that an institution does. You never will. And no, in any business, in any sector, right? But you are choosing to be a part of this team. You are choosing to drive these initiatives forward, and you are choosing to stay here and be a positive part of this team and contribute. Or you can recognize that this is not a place that is meeting your needs, that you have different needs and you have different goals, and you can leave in peace, the peace of knowing that this wasn't the right fit, that there is no moral positive or negative about the employee or the employer, that it just wasn't the right fit. And that is a theory that I share with my team regularly. I share with myself regularly. Like, my choice is to stay in joy or to leave in peace. Um, and they have that opportunity. And so when I've tried multiple things, like I come back to that and say, like, do you feel like this is the right fit for you? And if it's not, then I offer like, okay, how do I help you find somewhere that's a good fit for you? Because what I can't do is allow you for us to recognize that this is a bad fit and for that to impact the rest of the team too. Because we know that the fastest way to lose good invested talent is to allow people who aren't right for the organization, who aren't committed to the work, to stay around and to bring people down. We want to make sure we're developing atmospheres and environments where people can be successful and grow. And sometimes that means helping people find another place, which is hard.
It is hard. Thank you so much, Brandy. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Do you have a slide with your contact
I
information? Here she does.
do.
There you go. I thought there
Yes,
was a question that we didn't get to. So feel free to contact Brandy directly
yes,
with
please.
any questions. Again, thank you all for your participation. We have one more presentation in this track coming up at 1 o'clock with Jim Robinson talking about embodied communication. Also, be sure to take the survey when the webinar ends. We do appreciate your feedback. That is all we have for this session. Again, thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Lori. Thank you for everyone for being here. Hopefully, we will see you at a few more sessions today. If not, have a great rest of your day, and so long.
Thanks, everyone.